Have you ever looked at an old photo, maybe tucked in a drawer or hanging on a wall, and seen yourself standing side by side with your brother or sister, both of you smiling wide, full of mischief and laughter? You might have shared a bedroom, a bicycle, or even a big bowl of cereal before school. Back then, it felt like nothing could pull you apart. But now, years, maybe even decades, have passed, and you barely talk. The phone doesn't ring. Holidays are quieter. The closeness is gone. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Many people, especially as they grow older, find themselves wondering, what happened? How did we go from being childhood playmates to distant strangers? That question isn't just painful, it's deeply personal. Because sibling relationships are some of the longest we'll ever have. They start in the early years, last through life's many chapters, and often end only when one of us says goodbye for the last time. So when that bond fades or fractures, the grief can feel quiet, but deep. This video is for you, if you've ever felt that distance. If you've asked yourself why your sibling doesn't reach out, or why you don't want to reach out anymore. We're going to gently explore the hidden reasons behind sibling estrangement, especially later in life. And you may be surprised to learn, it's often not about personality, geography, or even time. It goes back further. Much further. Let's start with something many people carry, but rarely talk about. Favoritism. Now, most parents would swear they love all their children equally. And maybe in their hearts they truly do. But even subtle differences in tone, attention, or expectations can plant seeds that grow into lifelong feelings of hurt or rivalry. A parent may spend more time with one child simply because they share a hobby. Or they may praise one sibling more often because they're easier to manage. To a child, those little things don't feel little at all. Psychologists have shown that even toddlers can pick up on parental preference. Just a quick smile, a gentle word, or the way mom or dad cheers at a school event, those moments lodge in a child's heart. And over time, those impressions become beliefs. She's the favorite. He's the one they really love. What's even more telling is that large studies have revealed how common this is. In one study, nearly 75% of mothers admitted they had a favorite child, whether they wanted to or not. And the children? They often knew. That awareness sticks. You might be 65, 70, or even 80 years old today, but still remember how your brother always got the bigger slice of cake. Or how your sister never got in trouble for the things you were punished for. And those memories aren't just sentimental. They shape our roles within the family, the responsible one, the rebel, the invisible one. Once those labels settle in, they're hard to shake. They can follow us into adulthood and even affect how we raise our own kids. But favoritism doesn't happen in a vacuum. For generations, culture and tradition have reinforced inequality between siblings, even without parents realizing it. In many families, especially those shaped by older customs or tight-knit communities, there's an unwritten rule. The oldest child leads, the youngest follows. Sons might be expected to carry the family name or shoulder responsibility, while daughters were told to be nurturing or stay close to home. Some of you might remember hearing things like, "You're the oldest, you should know better." Or, "She's just a girl, let her be." And let's not forget the inheritance traditions that gave everything to one child, usually a son, leaving the others to fend for themselves. In some cases, that child didn't even ask for the role, but it created resentment anyway. One child felt burdened by expectations. Another felt forgotten. These cultural norms don't disappear as we age. They show up quietly, like shadows in the background, influencing how we interact with our siblings even now. Maybe you still feel like you're expected to take care of everything. Or maybe you're still trying to prove your worth after being overlooked as a child. The emotional weight of these roles doesn't lighten just because we grow up. In fact, sometimes it gets heavier. Now you might be thinking, but that was so long ago. Or I've moved past that. And maybe you have. But here's the thing. Our bodies age, but our emotional memory stays sharp. Those moments of feeling unseen or overshadowed as a child, they don't just vanish. They become part of the emotional blueprint we carry into adulthood. And if those feelings were never spoken aloud, if there was never a chance to say, "That hurt," or "I always felt second best," then they often turn into silence. Not because we're angry. Sometimes we just get tired. Tired of being the one who tries. Tired of not being heard. Or tired of the same old patterns repeating themselves every family gathering, every phone call, every holiday. When favoritism and tradition mix, they can create emotional hierarchies. And those hierarchies don't always match what we think of as love. A parent might love all their children, but still expect one to be the strong one and another to stay quiet. The result? Siblings who see each other not as equals but as rivals. Or worse, strangers. And this leads to something even deeper, something that quietly shapes how we connect as adults. Memory. But not just any memory. We're talking about the kind of memory that distorts time. The kind that lingers even when we try to forget. Let's pause here for a moment. Maybe you're starting to reflect on your own family. Maybe certain memories are coming to the surface. That's okay. You're not alone. This is a journey many of us are on, especially as we reach a time in life where relationships matter more than ever. So take a breath and stay with me. There's more to explore, and much more hope than you might think. We often think of memory as a faithful record of the past, a clear picture stored neatly in the back of the mind, waiting to be recalled. But the truth is, memory doesn't just remember, it interprets. It colors our past with emotion, with meaning, with personal belief. And nowhere is that more powerful or more fragile than in our memories of family. You see, what you believe happened often matters more than what actually did. Two siblings can grow up in the same house, with the same parents, at the same dinner table, and yet carry two completely different stories of childhood. One might remember a home filled with laughter. The other, a place where they always felt second best. And both of them would be right. Because their truth was shaped not just by the events, but by how those events made them feel. So even if your sibling doesn't remember the favoritism, the distance, or the pressure, you do. And that's what sticks. That's what shapes how you see each other in the present. In fact, research shows that perceptions of favoritism in childhood are one of the strongest predictors of how close or distant siblings will be as adults. Not necessarily the favoritism itself, but the memory of it. If you've been carrying the weight of a childhood where you felt less loved, less valued, or less seen, that pain doesn't go away with age. It settles in, sometimes in quiet ways, through hesitation, through silence, through the choice not to call. And here's where it gets even more complex. Those memories don't live in isolation. They evolve, especially during adolescence. Those teenage years. They come with their own storms, identity, independence, the push and pull of figuring out who we are. And within the family, this is often when the cracks begin to show. Think about it. Teenagers are navigating school, friendships, hormones, and the overwhelming desire to be their own person. But at home, they're still part of a system, a sibling dynamic, a parental structure, a set of invisible rules. And if those rules feel unfair, the sense of injustice starts to grow louder. Maybe you remember being a teenager and feeling like your sister could get away with anything while you got blamed. Or maybe your brother was always told to take care of you, even when you didn't want or need that. These are more than annoyances. They're early warning signs of emotional distance, because adolescence isn't just rebellion. It's the beginning of separation. And if the foundation between siblings was already uneven, this is when the distance truly starts to grow. Some siblings argue, some drift apart quietly, some compete for space, privacy, or attention. But whatever form it takes, the emotional gap begins here. And for many, it never quite closes. By the time you reach adulthood, your 20s, 30s, and beyond, those early cracks may have widened into canyons. And once a certain amount of time passes, the silence starts to feel normal, even deserved. You think, we just grew apart. Or, we're too different now. But often, it wasn't the years that caused the gap. It was the patterns. And those patterns began early. And now we arrive at something difficult. Something uncomfortable, but also essential. Let's talk about the role of parents. This part is not about blame. It's about understanding. Most parents, maybe including yourself, do the best they can with what they have. They work hard. They love deeply. But even good intentions can go awry. And often, the deepest wounds come not from what parents meant to do, but from what they didn't even realize they were doing. Favoritism, as we've said, doesn't always look dramatic. It's not just about giving one child more gifts or praise. It can be as simple as expecting more from one child, trusting another too little, or assigning fixed roles. The smart one, the wild one, the helper, the burden. Over time, these roles become a kind of emotional straitjacket. They keep siblings locked into identities that may not fit, but are too familiar to escape. You might have been the strong one, always expected to hold it together even when you were struggling. Or maybe you were the quiet one, overlooked, unheard, and eventually unseen. And your sibling? They might have been seen as the golden child, or the rebel, or the one who always needed saving. Whatever the role, these labels shape how siblings see each other and themselves, and they rarely go away. In fact, for many families, these childhood roles are still alive and well when everyone's in their 60s or 70s. Think back to your last family gathering. Did you feel like you were 10 years old again? Did your brother still try to take charge, even though you're both retired? Did your sister talk to your adult children as if they were hers to manage? These are echoes of the old patterns, whispers of the past, still playing out in the present. But here's the hardest part. Many of these roles and labels didn't start with you. They started with your parents. Not necessarily out of cruelty or neglect, but simply through repetition, expectation, or tradition. And unless someone sees the pattern and breaks it, it continues. Quietly, invisibly, generationally. The good news is, understanding this gives you power. Real power. Because once you can name a pattern, you can choose whether or not to keep living in it. You may be wondering, but what if my sibling doesn't see it the way I do? And that's a fair question. Often they don't. Especially if they were on the favored side of the equation. But that doesn't mean your truth isn't valid. And it doesn't mean healing isn't possible. Sometimes the first step isn't about calling your sibling. It's about calling yourself into honesty. Naming what you felt. Acknowledging what shaped you. And allowing yourself to grieve. For the relationship you lost, the connection you hoped for, or the version of family that never quite came to be. Because before healing can begin, we need to see clearly. Not just with our eyes, but with our hearts. As we grow older, something changes in the way we feel time. It begins to move differently. Not slower, not faster, but deeper. We start to measure it not in days or months, but in moments. A phone call that never came, a family photo missing someone who used to be there, or the quiet ache we feel when birthdays come and go with no message, no voice on the line. Estrangement between siblings can feel like a bruise you carry under your skin. Invisible to others, but tender to the touch. You may not talk about it often. Maybe you've told yourself, "That's just how it is." Or, "We're too old to fix it now." But the pain is still there, tucked into the silence, the holidays spent apart, the memories that feel more distant than warm. And the impact goes far beyond missing a conversation or a shared laugh. Studies show that adults who are estranged from siblings often carry higher levels of anxiety, depression, and even mistrust in other relationships. When a sibling bond breaks, it can quietly fracture how we see the world and ourselves. For some, it creates a lifelong sense of not being enough. For others, it brings guilt. Maybe you were the one who pulled away, or maybe you stayed quiet too long. Either way, the weight is heavy, and it gets heavier when sibling estrangement is paired with something even more painful: sibling abuse. Now, abuse is a strong word, but it doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it's verbal, cruel teasing that never stopped. Sometimes it's emotional, constant undermining, competition, or exclusion. And sometimes it's physical, especially in childhood, when fights cross the line into harm. What's heartbreaking is that many families never speak of this. They brush it off as normal sibling rivalry, or say, "Kids will be kids." But the truth is, nearly half of children experience some form of aggression from a sibling that leaves a lasting mark. And when that's combined with parental favoritism, the damage can run deep. These early experiences, what psychologists call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, have been linked to serious outcomes later in life. Not just emotional wounds, but physical health issues too. Weakened immune systems, chronic illness, even shortened lifespans. But here's the part that matters most. These experiences, these imbalances, they aren't your fault. You didn't choose them. You were shaped by them. But being shaped by something doesn't mean you're stuck with it. And this is where things can begin to shift. Healing, even late in life, is not only possible, it's powerful. You might be wondering, where do I even begin? Sometimes healing starts with a conversation, but sometimes it starts quietly, with a shift in how you see yourself, with letting go of the label you were given, the overlooked one, the problem child, the fixer, and choosing a new name. One that reflects who you are now, not who you were told to be. And sometimes it means giving yourself permission to grieve, to feel the loss of what never was. Maybe you never had the close sibling relationship you wanted. Maybe your brother or sister isn't willing or able to meet you halfway. That's a real loss. And it's okay to feel it, to mourn it, but don't let it define you. There's a saying, grief is love with nowhere to go. But what if you gave that love somewhere to land? Not just back toward the past, but into the present, toward friends, toward chosen family, toward yourself. And yet, for some, there is a way back. And it often begins with honesty. Family therapists say that when siblings are willing to name the elephant in the room, favoritism, childhood hurt, unmet expectations, the silence begins to break. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. Sometimes this honesty only comes during big life moments. A wedding, an illness, the loss of a parent. Grief, oddly enough, can be a doorway. It softens the edges. It reminds us that time is short, and some things are worth revisiting, even if they hurt. Other times, healing requires help. A counselor, a mediator, or even just a safe space to say, "Here's what I felt. Here's what I carried." You don't have to force forgiveness. You don't have to pretend everything's okay. But if there's a small thread still connecting you to a sibling, a shared memory, a mutual respect, even just curiosity, that thread can be strengthened, rebuilt, rewoven into something new. And if reconciliation isn't possible, if the door truly has to remain closed, then healing can still happen. Not by reopening the past, but by learning from it. By choosing to break the pattern for the next generation. By becoming the kind of grandparent, parent, or friend who listens more, compares less, and loves without labels. You might be in your 60s, 70s, or 80s, and still wondering if it's too late to change the story. I want you to hear this as clearly as possible. It's not. Healing has no expiration date, and neither does love. You have the wisdom of experience, the courage of survival, and now the chance to choose something different, to pick up the phone, to write a letter, to forgive. Maybe not for them, but for you. And if that's not possible, then to forgive yourself, because even in silence, even in distance, your story matters, your heart matters, and the peace you seek is still within reach. If this video spoke to you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you found comfort here, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to our channel, Strong Elderly Life, where we explore the heart of what really matters in this season of life. Together, we can grow wiser, love deeper, and live more fully, no matter how old we are. Here's to healing. Here's to reconnection. And here's to living your best life at any age.